So if shame were trying to tell you something, what might that be? And if shame had a voice of its own, which person in your life would it sound most familiar to? You see, the feeling of guilt then is really there for us to be our compass. It's to tell us when we're off course, right? For better or for worse, shame's going to discourage us and other people from stepping outside of what's considered to be appropriate, acceptable, or normal behavior or normal reactions. If you were to put shame in a petri dish, it just needs 3 ingredients to grow exponentially. It needs secrecy, it needs silence, and it needs judgment. First, it's not hurt, fear, and shame. Hurt doesn't go so deep, right? It doesn't sear like fear or shame. And second, it's not fear and shame, it's fear of shame. Fortunately, there are steps we can take to overcome shame in our relationships by developing a healthy sense of self-compassion, communicating openly and honestly with our partners, and being willing to work on ourselves. Welcome everyone to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of The Awakened Man and your host, Alan DeMonso. It's no secret that we face many challenges in our daily lives. From work relationships to just trying to fit in, men are constantly under pressure to succeed. And for many men, when that doesn't happen, we can feel down, unworthy, and even depressed. And the core issue behind all of this is shame. And shame can be that incredibly embarrassing and damaging, not only to our self-esteem, but who we see ourselves as and who we are as individuals. And can keep us from reaching our full potential and make us feel like we're just not good enough. So in today's episode, we're going to unpack the nature of shame and how we can overcome it to become stronger mentally and emotionally. Now, before we get into all that, I want to remind you to hit like, subscribe, and share on your favorite platform so you can stay updated on our latest content while helping me grow the Awakened Man program and the message. And for that, I just want to say I'm truly grateful. So with that being said, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
So let me start off by asking you a couple of key questions. If shame were trying to tell you something, what might that be? And if shame had a voice of its own, which person in your life would it most sound like or most be familiar to you? Those are hard questions when you stop to think about it, aren't they? The experience of shame can be extremely uncomfortable, and shame has this potential to change the way we see ourselves. It may even lead to long-lasting social, professional, and even sexual difficulties. See, the word shame means different things to different people, doesn't it? The shame is different from guilt and embarrassment. There's still some similarities. See, guilt is usually understood to be involved with negative feelings. It's about an act that we have just committed. It's a violation of our moral, ethical value and principles. It's that feeling that we get when we are about to do something that we think that is wrong, maybe even know. And that might be something like lying or cheating or really betraying someone else's trust. It's an act of opposition really to what our belief systems are. And so we can just feel it in our bodies, can't we? We can just feel that when we're about to do something that we know that just isn't right. And that's when guilt starts to set in. You see, our feelings, no matter where they come from, they all do serve a purpose, don't they? You see, the feeling of guilt then is really there for us to be our compass. It's to tell us when we're off course, because guilt just doesn't feel good. And it was created that way on purpose, don't you think? Because it's like giving us that warning, that danger ahead if we choose to continue to proceed. Now, embarrassment, it deals with us in more of a societal reaction, right? We've all been in situations where we've been embarrassed. And it doesn't necessarily equate to shaming. Although it can turn into shame or shaming just by the reaction of other people around us and how we react to someone else, because we could also be those people that are perpetuating shame. But I want to get into that a little bit later in today's talk. Shame, on the other hand, when we think about it, it involves not only those negative feelings, but it's negative feelings about ourselves. And I know that could be a person we can also be shamed by our peers or by society in general. Shame is that piece that's really kept secret, isn't it? It's not something that we generally share, although we're going to touch on how it actually manifests itself, and other people how we can pick it up on ourselves and through other people. It's such a wretched feeling. I think we've all had moments of shame in our life. And then most of us when we try to deny that feeling, hoping that we just don't have to look at it. And we think, well, you know what, if I don't look at it, then maybe it's just going to disappear. But that darn shame, it's just so stubborn. And the more that we deny it, the more that it sticks to us. It's just like glue, and it's something that we need to deal with and face. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about the nature of guilt and shame. You see, if guilt was to serve a purpose of keeping us on course with our own vows and our ethics, then it's fair to say that shame keeps us socially in line, doesn't it? Right? For better or for worse, shame's going to discourage us and other people from stepping outside of what's considered to be appropriate, acceptable, or normal behavior or normal reactions. When it comes to shame for men, how do we know that we're not really fitting in? And we can get into these prehistoric ideas of what shame really looks like. So for a man, failing and being wrong are areas where we can feel shame, isn't it? Revealing a weakness is another way that we feel shame. We can get this sense of being defective, especially when we've failed or we've been wrong. Showing any fear. That's really an outdated idea about showing fear that can be very shameful. When people think that we're soft as guys, that we're soft because we're not tough enough, or we don't have that, what perceived this strong masculine presence. And when they can't remember the names of a guy on your favorite football team or NFL or professional sports team. I know I've had that occurrence. Somebody asked about a name of a guy and I just can't think of it. And do I need to feel shameful for that? Well, I don't need to, but there are opportunities for us too, right? And then we don't have a good sense of direction. Not only are maybe be a bit embarrassed about to ask for directions to go somewhere, but how about just a direction in our life? And somebody asks you, what is your life purpose, or what are you all about? You may feel shame as a man because you haven't had that stuff figured out. How about just even being able to describe what's wrong with our car or a computer or what have you? Like I've been having computer challenges this week, and I need to stand up and ask for help on it, and I don't have a clue what it is. And I can tell you there'd be times in the past where I probably would not have been as open as I am today. And my dad was a grease monkey. He loved working on cars, but I don't have a clue at all what happens around the car. I have an idea, but it's no need for me to feel shameful because it's just not something that I've decided to spend a lot of time and energy in truly understanding. How about even being able to do public speaking? Those are opportunities not just for men and women to feel shame, but we may feel shameful if we're being asked to do that and we have to say no because it's not something that we're either good at or proficient at. How about not being able to get the essence of a joke? Somebody tells a joke and everyone around you is laughing except you because you're just not picking it up. It can be all moments and not just of embarrassment, but depending on how that reaction goes over, it could also be a moment of shame. How about this, guys? We've all been standing at the urinal, right? You've ever been pee shy? And then other guys are noticing, right? Because you're at a game and you're trying to get your business done, and then somebody then turns around and yells, "Hey, what the hell's taking so long?" I tell you, that can be extremely embarrassing and even shameful, depending on your upbringing and how that is brought to you. How about another one for guys? There's this idea that as men, that we need to be able to, in the bedroom, need to be able to last longer than our partners. And what if you can't? What if you have premature ejaculation, or even to the next level and you have challenges with ED? A lot of those, especially for us men, can be challenging as it doesn't meet the idea in our own minds of what it is to be manly. It can be extremely shameful. So if you're not having in a relationship with a supportive partner, it can be extremely painful for us to experience. Or being in the presence of other men, and then they feel that like we're being dominated by a woman. It can be an opportunity for us to feel a bit shameful because we're not in this prehistoric idea of who we should truly be as men. And when we don't participate in manly endeavors, like hunting and dangerous sports, or being able to even just start a fire to go camping, these are just basic things that we may not always participate in. And there are skills that we can learn. Depending in the company that we're in, can be extremely shameful. Now, gentlemen, listen, even at the same time, there's women deal with shame all the time, don't they? They deal especially from other women. They're extremely hard on them, on each other. But for women, it's really, shame really focuses on body image. The big hips wasn't cool until J-Lo came on the screen, right? And the hairstyles, if they're out of style, well, God forbid that you're not keeping up with the latest trend. Or maybe they're just not they're freely enjoying sex. And we all know what names those ladies get called. But hey, look, it's okay for a guy to be like that, isn't it? But come on now. Even if you don't have any children or you're not raising children, I think it's important for us to point out and notice that how we treat the women in our lives is a great indication of the strength that we're going to give them, as well as being able to give them an opportunity to not be in a position to be shamed. So here's a question for you. Is guilt or shame inborn, or do you think that it's something that's learned? For me, I think it's it's a chicken and the egg thing. All the way back to Adam and Eve, before eating the tree of knowledge, they were blissful, weren't they? Didn't even know what it was to be shameful. Shame came after eating the fruit and being told to cover themselves. That's no different than how most of us have learned about shame. Whereas children, there came to a point where running around without our clothes is just no longer acceptable, or being caught fondling yourself as a child. So we did learn about shame when we were told, when we were told, right? But was it always in us? And all we needed was something to awaken that we are being shameful and doing acts. I think it's important that we think about that question. Because when was the last time that you felt shame? Is it something that triggered it from an outside experience, or was it something that happened for yourself? I want to switch gear a little bit and unpack how shame is really killing our relationships today. I call shame the silent killer of relationship. And it holds that moniker because of the damage it creates in connecting with our wives. It makes us feel isolated and alone, and can lead to communication problems. And if we're not careful, shame can even destroy the strongest of relationships. Fortunately, there are steps we can take to overcome shame in our relationships by developing a healthy sense of self-compassion, communicating openly and honestly with our partners, and being willing to work on ourselves. And all of this serves us in overcoming the negative effects of shame while building a strong and healthy relationship. But I want to go back and talk a little bit more about our wives and our daughters for a moment. For women, shame manifests in many other ways, and it arises from beliefs of them having to be great mothers or good mothers and sexy wives and successful breadwinners and caring friends and be good sisters, like you name it. There's lots of opportunities for women to be shamed. And as fathers and husbands, again, it's our role to tame shame and to be conscious of the language that we use, especially as we raise our sons and our daughters, by breaking stereotypes and letting our daughters know that they are enough as they are. And for our wives, while we may enjoy our spouses in sexy lingerie, seeing them as equals in the relationship, tending to their needs and supporting their careers and aspirations, first will do wonders for the bedroom. And for most of us men, seeing them as objects other than that what we care to admit is something that we really need to be conscious about. And then for shame, for men, I should say, shame usually manifests when we don't feel strong. And I really like how Dr. Brene Brown, an expert on shame, says, while women are faced with a web of many layered, competing and conflicting expectations, there seems to just be one major expectation for men, and that is do not appear weak. Let that sink in for a minute. How many of us have been raised with that belief as guys that, appearing that we are weak is not a good thing? And it can be shameful for us. And so the way we react to shame also differs between men and women. See, women often blame themselves and turn inward and look embarrassed when they feel ashamed. But as men, we tend to turn outward. We're often blaming others when we feel that we're being ashamed. And then we can get angry and even explode outwardly. And so, in fact, according to Dr. James Gillingham, after spending nearly 30 years researching anger and violence in men, he says, I have yet to see a serious act of violence that was not provoked by the experience of feeling shamed and humiliated, disrespected and ridiculed, and that did not represent the attempt to prevent or undo this loss of face. See, all of us want some respect, but for men, it is truly essential. Here's another quote that I really like from Dr. Brene Brown. If you were to put shame in a petri dish, it just needs 3 ingredients to grow exponentially. It needs secrecy, it needs silence, and it needs judgment. And if you put those 3, the same amount of shame in a petri dish, and then you douse it with empathy, it can't survive. And I think back on the moments that I have felt shame in my life, and those 3 ingredients were so present. The secrecy behind why the shame came about, the silence about not wanting to talk about it, or we're not talking about it, and especially the judgment surrounded about it if it does come out and you're not in a safe space. Even the judgment we put on ourselves, let alone that. And we do need some empathy. Providing a little bit of empathy helps us to unpack and start to resolve the shame that we feel in our lives. Now I want to explore a little bit further about the causes of shame. Shame is often going to be associated or tied to a trauma, especially as a child, or if you were neglected at a young age. And there are lots of mental health disorders that involve self-criticism or judgment that are also linked to shame. So here are a few causes that I'd like to discuss today. If you're an individual and you're feeling that you're not living up to your standards that you've set for yourself, could it be possible that your standards are set too high, unrealistically too high? Or you have feelings as though that you're flawed or inadequate, especially if you have set yourself with standards that are so high that they're just not attainable. How about being a victim of bullying? Bullying, especially if it happens at a younger age, can be something that we can carry with us for a long time. And so we can feel shameful because we weren't able to deal with the situation at that moment. Our expectations are not being met, or you're experiencing a failure. How many times in our lives are we having those actions that occur for us? Because let's face it, if you're not striving or trying to get something done, you're going to have expectations that won't be met, and you're going to experience failure. But do they need to be associated with shame? This is the question that I challenge you. And being rejected from others, or a weakening of a relationship, especially if we've put a lot of expectation and meaning around those pieces of how devastating that can be for us. So here's a question for you. Which of those that I just mentioned caused you to feel shame? And if there are none, good for you. But are there other ways that you are feeling shame? And if so, what are they? Touching on the fear of shame, I'm going to go back to Charlie Donaldson. He's the founder of the Men's Counseling Center of North Michigan. And he tells a story about a group he was leading when his colleague, Kirk Brink, was a group supervisor and a great therapist and a truly wise man, came in and joined their conversation. He said, first, it's not hurt, fear, and shame. Hurt doesn't go so deep, right? And it doesn't sear like fear or shame. And second, it's not fear and shame, it's fear of shame. So many men live with the fear of being shamed. I live in this fear of embarrassment, intimidation, and humiliation. This is what makes us watchful and guarded and vigilant, isn't it? It's why we keep our distance or act more confidently than we truly are. So we are either going to cave in and just hide from everything, or we're going to be overly confident and overly out there, just so that we can hide the shame. And we do all this because we just don't want to deal with any more of that shame. It's like going through life and being on patrol in a war zone, never really knowing when we will be ambushed. And we do this because we've been conditioned through so frequently being ridiculed, mocked, and bullied. I just think of my childhood and how easy it was for us to ridicule and mock each other. And there's a big difference between cutting down each other in a friendly manner and teasing each other. And there's a completely another thing when it's being done on purpose to be vengeful and spiteful. And yet we do that as children. And it can stick with us for many years. And if we're not able to recognize where that shame is coming from, we can carry it into adulthood, prevent us from, as I said earlier, living to our full potential. So how do you know you're being shamed? Well, I'm going to give you a short little list, and this comes from Peter Breggin in his book, which I really like, is Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety. He says, when we have feelings of being sensitive or unappreciated, used or rejected, or like you have little impact, are clues that we might be feeling some shame. When we have uncontrolled blushing, it can be an opportunity that we might be feeling shame, or being worried about what others think about us. Hey, just so you know, we're never as important as we think we are, because nobody's really spending too much time thinking about who we are, but we spend a lot of time wondering, don't we? And worrying that we aren't being treated with respect, and feeling like others are taking advantage of us, wanting to have the last word. I know a few individuals that are like that, and being a perfectionist. And that's probably one of the flaws that I know that I need to work on, is being this perfectionist and wanting to just make sure everything is just right. And even today, as I think back at the start of this podcast and stumbling over a few words, and will I decide to edit all those out or just let it fly? You know what? It's a great topic today on shame. So why don't I just let it fly, and it is what it is. And how about feeling like an outsider, or that you're different, or that you're being left out? Don't we all want to be part of the in crowd? Excuse me. Sorry about that. We all want to be part of that in crowd, into that inner circle. And when we're not, that circle could either shame us, or we could feel ashamed for not being able to live up to that standard. But does it really matter for our lives, and will it really make a difference? He also goes on to talk a little bit about how in our bodies it displays, and how we manifest shame, and so how it looks to others and to ourselves. When we start looking down, and instead of looking people in the eye, it can be an indication of being shame, even bashful. Keeping your head hung low, as I just mentioned, right? Slumping our shoulders instead of standing up straight. Feeling frozen or unable to move. Not being able to act spontaneously are all items of how shame can manifest itself. Or have you ever had that experience where you started to stutter when you're trying to speak and you're trying to catch your words? It kind of sounded like me at the start of this podcast a bit. And it can happen to any of us. It can be an opportunity for how we're displaying how shame is being displayed for us. Or how about just talking like overly soft? Because if we speak too loud, then maybe somebody will hear what we're saying and they can call us out. And so why would we do that? Why would we speak soft? Because we're unsure, and we're hiding ourselves from others. And when we do that, it's because there's some form of shame that we're holding in about what it is that we're discussing. There's ways that we do feel that we can be on the other side of that spectrum, though, isn't it? We can be that individual that's shaming other folks, other people. And when you're doing that, it's generally coming from an intention because you're likely being hurt about something. So how does that look like? And how are you displaying shame or shaming someone else? It's when we choose to speak overly loud, or we're talking over top of someone, like we're trying to prove a point. When we continually point our finger at somebody, as we're, again, trying to get our message across. We glare, or we're making really intense eye contact. It's that intimidation piece I mentioned earlier, right? Or the other side, I just refuse to acknowledge them, so you don't make any eye contact whatsoever. How about being mocked and belittled? Again, I think back to some of my childhood experiences, and I'm sure many of my listeners today have had similar, being mocked and belittled, or being made fun of in front of other people. There's a big fine line, I would suggest, that between having a joke and being sarcastic to try to point something out and being truly hurtful for it with somebody else. And so there's fine line that we need to be careful in how we're walking. Or when somebody stands over you in an aggressive manner. And I can think of that, of how, especially people who are much taller than the norm in society. And I've known some individuals who will use that height and stand right in front of you, basically kneecap to kneecap, forcing you to look straight up at them. It's a strong form of intimidation, and it can be very shameful if you're on the receiving side. So however, you don't have to internalize any of this shame or let it affect you. You can also respond assertively to ask them to treat you with respect and to take a step back. So that's going to lead me into how we can start to heal the shame that we have in our lives. To heal shame, we need to truly be seen, and to do that, we need to allow ourselves and others to be vulnerable enough to reveal the things that we feel shame about. That's a tall task. I know that I'm asking for you guys, for most men to do, and really for anyone. Yet it's the work that we're here to do, isn't it? It's the work to be able to get over this shame and to start to deal with it. And then the ways that are to heal shame, the first thing we need to be able to do, that first step, is we need to legitimize that we have our own needs. And then when we start from that point, it's because the shame that's associated with this is usually the shame of feeling unworthy. And so by starting with the unworthiness of who we are, which is, to me, the basis of where shame really starts, is we no longer have to tell ourselves that we're not worthy of receiving those needs, right? And guess what? When we do that and we get them met, we may feel a little bit of guilt, but the shame will start to reside. And the guilt is only there because it's just an indication that we have more work to do by getting our needs met. And we can then, as we do that, we start to build up a tolerance for shame, don't we? And that's really the ultimate goal, because in reality, we're likely not to get rid of shame completely from ourselves. So how are we going to do that? So how are we going to really start to build up that tolerance? Well, I already mentioned about starting with legitimizing our needs, but we can do that by stepping out on that limb, right? And putting ourselves out there as individuals, exposing us to the potential of being rejected or failing. Because remember, it's going to be the stories that we tell ourselves that we need to look at if we're feeling shame. And I suggest doing this step initially with someone that you're going to trust, someone who can support you in your healing journey, to give you that strength and that foundation to build on, so that you can attack the greater pieces of shame that are in part of your life. Now, in closing, I just want to say that in the Awakened Man Academy, we unpack shame in depth, and it's one of the lessons in our Man Box module. And by unpacking the beliefs around that shame that we are feeling, as we systematically deconstruct the vulnerability around it, and then start to recognize what the external factors and triggers are, that can lead to the feeling of shame. We can connect then with men in our brotherhood that helps us to be able to be seen, heard, and supported. This is just an example of some of the work that I do here in the Awakened Man, program. Now, this is open for all men, but the only way for you to learn about it is you got to take action. And I'm going to recommend you start your action by starting your own hero's quest, because we're all on a hero's journey, aren't we? And in this hero's quest, it's our 90-day mentoring program, and it's guaranteed to raise the standard for how you show up in every part of your life. And this program is not something that you can join and you can hide, right? It's going to challenge you, and you'll work harder on yourself in the next 90 days than you have all of last year, probably in decades. What's the reward? On the other side, you're going to come out unrecognizable, because you'll be living and acting in the highest vision of who you are. And to make it easy for you, I'm going to provide a link on this page. You can speak one-on-one with me to see if we're a fit. Because not all men are ready to make this commitment. But those that do make such huge strides in their lives. They repair their marriages, they get back on track with their life purpose, and they find out what they're truly made of. And so if that sounds like you and you're that kind of man, then I'm going to look forward to working with you in our Awakened Man program. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Aho, my brothers.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is the Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.